see if I can get into this. All right. So all these, yeah, look, the session that I am proposing is a joint thing, building communities with LCT where knowledge meets knowing. So I guess this, just to jump into it, this was all inspired by everyone in the community, but in particular, these lovely people right here. And I'm glad that Jack and Jody have joined us as well, because a lot of the initial sort of ideas for this sort of, I have to give full credit to them as well. But inspiration for the discussion is these 5 people in that just after the first lockdown in Melbourne, we all decided that it was probably a good idea just to catch up online. Okay, and so we kind of organised, I think it was in June 2020, and I think I'm there in the darkness at about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and I think Steve is at the other end of the day, so it's like 10:30 for him at night. And so we kind of found a time where we'd all meet together, and we just got together. And we of course, we like to come up with the name. I think we called it GO, which I think was Jody's suggestion, Global Online. And so we're all part of other LCT groups that do or don't meet regularly. And we've got all these different modes of contact and different ways that we interact. So I participate with the LCT North America group, which Jody sort of helps coordinate. I join in with Steve in the LCT UK group. I've also been participating with the LCT Bits group as well. And I've just moved to Singapore, so I get to join in with the LCT Singapore group as well. And Jody, you're here. How many groups are you with, Jody?
Just the one, although, managed to visit a few while in Australia. It was great, better time zones.
Yeah, and oh, that's right, Jack. I also sometimes join in with Jack at LCT Queensland as well. Although much less frequently, I have to say as well. So look, everyone sort of we're all these sort of different groups. I know Anavir is part of the Denmark group as well. Steve joins in with them when he can. And the thing about this particular group was it's not actually an LCT discussion group per se. It's more based on the friendships that we've all created through conferences and the LCT and or SFL communities as well. And as I said, started in June as well. I think it was an antidote to the idea of we're all sort of stuck at home, and we kind of need to, reach out to people and, have some more contact. I think was a nice way to think about it as well. So got this quote. This is from Jack. Jack's wonderful little quote, which I just, I think it summarizes quite nicely. Jack, can you read your own quote?
Where did this come from?
This came on the little one of the notes on the document that Jody shared when Jody first put together the idea for the serendipitous relativism.
Cool. I'll let people read it. It's weird to read your own thing out of the off the screen.
Do it, Jack. Do it.
How about I explain what I meant when I wrote this? I can't remember writing this, but I think what I was trying to say was that a motivation to do something like this, in addition to the lockdown thing, LCT4 was a pivotal point of my PhD journey, because it was that sort of 6 months before I finished, and it was a huge boost of community enthusiasm at a point when it was very critical. So I think I had a newfound appreciation for the absence of that in my kind of day-to-day environment where I was living and working and all the rest at that particular point in time. So that was part of the motivation.
And yeah, I think that was, I guess I chose that quote and stuck it in because I'm very much, I think it's a great quote. I love it as well. And it's the same thing. I remember sitting around and spending time in, when we were in Joburg all together, And it was just a wonderful experience at LCT3 to sort of be going to the conference during the day and then in the evenings to be together in the hotel where we were staying, and being able to sort of sit around the fire and, you know, whether it was talking about LCT stuff or not LCT stuff, it was a really awesome experience. And so it was something that we sort of wanted to, I think, sort of keep going. And as Jack said really nicely, I like the idea of finding your people. I think that's a really great quote. So I guess what's inspired this particular, you know, little session is how might the nature of the group be theorized and how might we use different dimensions of LCT to do so. So I've just thrown up some of the possible planes that we might be able to use here. So we've got the, what have we got here? We've got specialization, we've got the epistemic plane, and we've got the autonomy as well. So I think everybody here is fairly familiar with these and we've seen them before, but, you know, we'll sort of see where this goes and see what happens. So another thing that, thanks again to Jody and Jack for sort of doing the hard thinking here, but they were talking about the notion of a basis of entry. So basis of entry into the group. So most importantly, NOAA code entry criteria. We all get along well and are friends. Now I didn't put up the quote, the other element of the quote, which was basically saying it's only us 5 at the moment. And it's only us 5 because that's just what it started with. Yeah, that was our entry code criteria, NOAA code criteria to begin it all. Now, Jody, I want you to explain to me a little bit more this one here, a discursive insight as entry criteria. So a discursive insight, I was looking for it. I know there's discursive relations.
Yeah.
And I was wondering.
Sorry, yeah, it should be doctrinal insight with stronger discursive relations. So I keep coming across, like, particularly doing conferences online, this notion of, like, I feel like a shared approach or a shared theory is the basis of community building within more of a knowledge code society. I've gone to conferences which share SFL or share LCT, and it's great, even online and at a distance. And then I've gone to conferences which have the shared object of study, but lots of different approaches. And so they have a slightly different object study than me, and it's not the same. And so within LCT Go, yeah, we don't necessarily meet to talk about LCT, but we have LCT. So as that entry point, as that, as you say, we met at conferences, we met talking about LCT, sharing that theory, even if it's for the purposes of community building rather than the purposes of knowledge building, has an impact.
So there's some insight into one element of the group, but there's another aspect as well, which was the interaction. So when we're actually in the meeting, when we've all sort of caught up with each other, and so the discussions, what we're talking about. So there was a suggestion, theoretically, that could be based on a relativist code or an exotic code. So you know, we'll get together, hey, how are you? The personal updates, but it's not just the hi, how you doing, the Australian g'day, how are you, mate, wave your head, move on. It's, you know, we'll often end up talking about our personal updates. So it could be Jack baking his bread, me and my garden building, or Jody and her recent move. And we may end up talking about that for an hour or an hour and a half. It's definitely weird to start with data, okay, or an analysis problem, and no one has ever presented a slideshow, and I don't think anyone ever will. But they don't stay in the relativist code. They don't stay in the exotic code. We sort of move around. So we begin there, but where do we go next? So the notion of this is where the original title was serendipitous relativism, which I still love. Sort of, it doesn't roll off the tongue nicely, but it is fun to say. So the hypothesis is that the relativist exotic code event allows us to move into any code as we're needed. So we can take what we're talking about and we can think about them. We go, okay, well, how might we theorize this? You know, let's see what this is happening in terms of autonomy. You know, well, what's our target? What's sort of happening here? Or, you know, what's our basis of achievement? What are we thinking about? So we also slip off sometimes into the problems that we're working on at the moment. So working on book chapters, these sorts of things, we're often talking about some of the things that we're working on. What are we writing? What's the data? What are the analysis? what are we working with at the moment, sort of bounce our ideas off each other. And as I said earlier, sometimes we can just stay in that sort of thing and just talk about anything that's just not LCT. And I did find that little meme, which I sort of thought was a nice sort of summary of the feeling that we have in our little group, or that I have when I'm talking with some of my close friends about these sorts of things. I know that my hobby, I can put in anything there. Me explaining why LCT is amazing, me explaining why gardening is amazing, me explaining why coffee is amazing, me explaining why bread breaking is amazing, whatever it is. And we know that everybody in this group is going to be doing that. We know that they're going to be agreeing with each other here. So that's kind of an idea of the particular group. Now, originally I thought about breakout rooms, but I think we'll all stay here together because it's more fun and there's not a lot of people, and I think it's definitely manageable here. So this is meant to be a discussion. So it's sort of thinking about, what kinds of communities can we build through having LCT in common, and what's the nature of these different groups? We know that it's relational. So, how might the nature be theorized with multiple dimensions of LCT, and how might these dimensions and codes be relevant to the different groups that we participate in? So we've kind of got a lot of cool stuff going on in the chat over there, which is definitely sovereign code for what we're trying to do in this session. So I think Erica said earlier, often what's going on in the chat is actually community building. And that's a really, important part of the community that we're in. And I think it's something that, allows us to sort of maintain these relations and keep something going. We can't just always be talking about academic stuff. We've got to have that, we've got to be switching between the codes. We've got to be moving to have these sort of, to build and maintain these relationships. ER in the slides, SR in the chat. Exactly. So I've got some kind of guiding questions here. And I'm sort of hoping that some people would like to share some of their experiences, or some of the answers to some of these questions. We don't need to go all over them.
I'll jump in just because I've been thinking about this for the last 6 months or so, and give everybody else a chance to process. So LCT North America, we meet online every 2 weeks. We did start online before the pandemic, but once the pandemic started, we pretty much have gone nonstop since then. And we followed the model that I picked up from LCT OG, which is a person nominates themselves for a session and they can do whatever they want with it as long as it involves LCT. So very much that doctrinal insight, again, of any object of study, as long as the approach is aligned. And one thing that just kind of sparks looking at your questions today, Daniel, was we had our LCTNA session early today in this time zone at any rate. And afterwards, it was nice. We jumped on the Slack, on the email to say, anybody want to meet up afterwards? We talked on Zoom, and it was really interesting to hear. Maybe Jennifer wants to put her hand up here, but Jennifer and Carol talk about, hey, as people who are relative newbies to LCT, what are we, 4 years ago now, 3.5 years ago, like being able to engage and follow and understand everything from that doctrinal insight obtained through regular discussions of LCTNA was interesting. But yes, there are PowerPoint presentations, and yes, there's online schedule of who's going to present each week. And yes, I have to send reminders and survey people to find a time that suits as many people as possible. So if you're at all interested, get in touch.
I'll pick up Jody's nudge and just acknowledge that, well, actually to push back a little bit, I don't know that we're understanding everything, but that's also part of the beauty of the group, is that it is as much not just a reading group, but a learning group. And so some things we've worked through, and in the debrief today, I wasn't able to present live. So I pre-recorded and then checked in afterwards. And then sort of the deconstruction and the discussion of, and the connection that were made, and the real gratitude of, well, you taught me this and you showed me that, and the back and forth, it really is, is the opposite of some academic contexts. I won't say communities because some of those can be competitive, and this is the opposite of that. And therefore, I think it is a stronger community because of it.
I might add to that, just from the LCT Queensland perspective. Ours operates entirely differently in that we are very, very loose, and we just aim to be in the same room at the same time each week. But it's still very problem oriented. It has a mix of people doing PhDs and people who have somewhat recently finished doing PhDs. And the thing that I think is important about that group, and that I think I've also experienced in the LCT North America group, and certainly from the little group you were talking about that we have to begin with, Daniel, is the low stakes nature of it. And the sort of in all three of those groups, I experienced an opportunity to just sort of follow a lead. And there's really, like, the learning potential is, I often think, quite high for that reason. I certainly will always walk away, you know, I think having benefited from taking opportunities that would be riskier in other situations. So.
Yeah, so maybe I can come in here from the VIT side. So our group started meeting about 2016, and it was very ad hoc in those days. But you know, we were the organizing committee for LCT4, and sort of also after LCT3, there was just so much investment, so much interest, and people just wanted to keep connected. And so we had this core group, and it started off with me and my PhD students and, you know, a couple of others from the School of Education. And by kind of September 2019, we had to move out of our little boardroom into a tutorial venue because people were coming from different faculties and even different institutions, different schools, teachers, you know, around Johannesburg were coming to us. So we set up this regular meeting time, 2:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. And that was like, that became our sacred time. There was just, you know, if I was called to meeting during that time, sorry, I'm not available. And, you know, if the meetings were so urgent that I needed to be there, then everybody knew they had to reschedule them to a time that I could attend, but that was my non-negotiable time. And, you know, I was in school leadership at that point, and, you know, where you're busy putting out fires all the time, every single day. And I just needed to reclaim this sacred space. So we'd probably got up to maybe 12 or 16 people that were meeting every week in person. And I would kind of just bring juices or biscuits or something. And then suddenly other people started bringing, you know, scones or cooking cookies or whatever, and it just became a thing. Like, okay, well, next week I'll bring whatever it was. And then, of course, when COVID hit, we were a little bit, okay, so now what do we do? We didn't want to lose this momentum, and we went online. And of course, then that opened up all kinds of possibilities for inviting guest speakers. So Daniel, you were a guest speaker at one of our sessions, and Mlamuli came to one of our sessions, and, you know, others and so on. And it also meant then, you know, people would say, okay, you know what, I'd really like to join. Can we join? So, and Avera, you know, people around the world started popping in. as visitors. And that kind of also opened up all kinds of things, because now instead of just the South African kind of speaking about our own context, we had to elaborate on our context, because, you know, Steve Rollett was there, or Steve Kirk was there, or, you know, and so where we got up to, we now became so big that it was just unsustainable as just a little group of academics who were just kind of getting together for their own, you know, for their own sacred space, so to speak. So we put in an application to establish ourselves as a formal research entity, which was so strongly supported in our institution. And we've got to the point now where we've got people from about 6 different South African universities and members from 13 countries that join us regularly in that time slot. What do? We read. So sometimes there's a chapter you've got to read, or a paper you've got to read, and we have a reading discussion. Sometimes we do fun things like the LCT goes to the movies, and our session yesterday with the NAC and so on, those kind of where we just take something random and like, let's just see what does LCT and the various dimensions open up. And the other thing is, of course, we have our bring and share, and that means you bring and share your food, but you also bring and share your research, obviously. Or if you we're not in the online space, you bring a cup of tea, but we sit and we share our research in progress in the safe space where everybody is just so invested in your success and will tell you straight, you know, look, this is working, that's not working, there's your golden thread, there's your diamond. So that's a little bit about LCT Vets and how we've got to where we are.
Well, yeah, thanks, Lee. I think the notion of the safe space is something that, you know, we all really share and feel a lot as well. It sure does sound wonderful. I'm just sort of keeping track of the chat as it's rolling through on the left-hand side of my screen here. But, you know, at the beginning of this talk, or just before this talk, we were talking about the codes and how we move around, and, you know, the community building. And yeah, I think Jody said it quite nicely, ER on the screen and SR in the chat. So I saw something else. So I was sort of thinking that these might be some other sort of ways that we can think about these different communities, the basis of entry, the basis of interaction. I think it's sort of, you know, it's something that, you know, different ideas there as well. Carl, have you got your hand up?
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry, I'm in between. I've been 5 hours on the phone to my telco, trying to organize my internet, which is collapsing all the time. But so if I sound a bit frustrated, that's why. Mm-hmm. And if I get interrupted, it's because I'm continually messaging them. Yeah, I just talking about the community aspect of it is maybe I should wait until I stop doing this thing. But anyway, when I was growing up, as it were, when the community in which I was engaged before LCT, there was a very strong sense that it was good for younger scholars and PhDs to be sort of, you know, put through the fire. So, and this was made very clear to me, actually, explicitly, that, you know, the more senior scholars believed that this was good for people to be really cross-examined. But there's a real difference between kind of, you know, discussing things critically and the way in which you do that. So between the kind of content and the form. And the way in which they did it was, I thought, mean and sadistic, and would reduce people to tears. It just did not seem to me in any way nice or positive or anything. And it was seen, and as I said, couple of senior figures in that community said this to me over the years, that this was a good thing. Somehow, you know, you would come out of this as you would out of some sort of battle, and you would be battle hardened and so on. But so when I broke with that community, because they just didn't, they just said that if you want to do LCT, bugger off and have your own LCT conference. And I just thought, yeah, okay, it's a good idea. And that community then collapsed without LCT in it. I just thought, well, look, that's the last thing I want, is for people to be feeling like they're, you know, that there is a real belief that standards require viciousness. And if you watch, like in popular culture, for example, I love the film. What's that film with the jazz drummer? My brain is slightly distracted from
Whiplash.
how he did it. Whiplash, that's right. Yeah. So there's that sense in which, you know, you have to be really, really nasty in order to, you know, reach greatness or whatever, and you have to be vicious to people and so on and so on. And I just thought, well, do you really? Is it the case that that you have to be this, you know, kind of vicious and nasty and almost, you know, just like reducing people to tears in order to improve their ideas? I didn't think so. So that's what I've kind of tried to encourage. Well, these try to encourage as well a bit, and I know other people have been attracted to that, and then they encourage it, and it becomes a sort of self-perpetuating culture. I think by the time I remember LCT1 was really good. LCT2, I could see it, felt it as a community, and then LCT3, it became, I felt like the culture had sort of taken hold, that there was a kind of distinctive culture of positivity. And, you know, even if somebody gave a talk that wasn't great, people would sit around and chat about ideas and try and help the person along and encourage them, but sort of point out where they could go next and so on. So I felt that the kind of culture had become kind of self-perpetuating. I'm not saying, by the way, that this is just all my doing, because it requires everybody to be on board, and it is everyone's responsibility. One person is not a field. But I just think that it is really easy to forget what a bunch of shits academics can be. I almost said something stronger then. They really can be an absolute bucket of something else. And that is a common belief, that that quality requires some sort of viciousness. And I will subject people's ideas to really, really strong criticism. And I have a tendency to write things into the margins of PhD students' work that I'm sure is really upsetting, because I have a tendency to take the piss out of it a lot. And I'm sure that I'm not a very good supervisor in many ways, because I am very impatient, and I am very just want to roll my sleeves up and get on with the ideas. But I think there's a real difference between sort of trying to park your egos at the door, trying not to be easily upset, trying not to be a snowflake or whatever it might be, and saying, okay, they're the ideas, they're on the table, let's now try and work together with our sleeves rolled up and really get into it. I think there's a difference between that and taking sadistic delight in reducing people to rubble. And I do believe that that often happens in conferences and communities. But we just have to make sure that it doesn't become, you know, kind of like sitting around the campfire singing Kumbaya. And we definitely don't want it to be like some sort of undergraduate tutorial where people say nonsense and then the person running it says, thank you, that was a really great contribution. There should be the capacity to say, yeah, you know, that's wrong.
Well, there's a time and a place for sadism. There's a time and a place for, you know, sitting around and kumbayaing.
Well, there is, yeah. I'm not a huge fan of it.
You don't have to be.
I have a tendency to look at, maybe that's a personal thing though. I have a tendency to look at my clock, my watch, and think, Christ, I could be doing something else. But there is a place for that, and there are many different kinds of knowers here, and they all have their own ways of doing things, and we're all very, very different. But so I just think it's really important that as we develop and groups, and this is all about group strengthening this conference and decentering the center in a world which is now, you know, rather broken up, to ensure that, you know, LCT is like that one's a little out of date. There is one with Alaska also red, but I think it's very important that we do maintain the knowers lab, knower positivity and knowledge criticism. We can be critical epistemologically. We don't have to be a bunch of axiological assholes. That's what I think anyway. I'm not putting that very well because I've had such a really crap day with renovations beginning above me without any warning while I was trying to do the interview this morning, and then a whole day of internet problems that I've in fact cracked open a bottle of wine already. So don't quote me on any of that.
There's nothing wrong with that, Cal. I've got a glass of wine too, so you're not alone.
Raise your glasses, people, if you've got one. What was it, Namali? What did you say? LCTT?
That's me, and me with Letitia, just drinking tea on her couch while she looks after my children.
Another example of community building.
Yeah, they're great babysitters, by the way. I definitely recommend, if you ever come to LCT, if you come to Singapore, you can go to Letitia's and sit on a couch. And yeah, if you have annoying pets or children to give her, even better.
It's completely irresponsible advice to give anyone, but you're welcome anyway. Apparently, my tea is also pretty bad. I just use that kind
I'm
of.
Sri Lankan. I'm sorry, I have standards.
You're
That's like one of the few
Can I just add
one of
this?
the places you couldn't go to from Japan. Awesome. Letitia will be there, and it will be there in about a week or so.
Sorry
Well,
to
yeah, this.
while you're having fun about tea, and normally I would join in because being a massive tea drinker, but just while I'm banging this drum and on this soapbox, because I've not climbed down from it, I'm just standing up on this soapbox and drinking this red wine semi-angrily. I just think that I just want to really emphasize this point that you make it what it is, and it doesn't happen without your work. So, and also that it is not usual. And I think that, you know, that as people come up through LCT, they will be in another field. Everybody should be in another field. But we should never forget just how lucky we are to be a part of a community that is really friendly and supportive and thoughtful and generous, and, you know, things like that. Sorry, I just killed off the conversation with that kind of, like, you know, banging of a drum.
Not at all, not at all. I'm just looking at the time going. I think that there's a baton change. I was just waiting for someone to either jump in or.
Oh, what do we have next?
Thanks, Daniel. We are waiting when you're ready, but no rush.
Oh, look, I think we've had a nice little chat, and we'll sort of continue on with this this wonderful conference. Lovely to see you. Hello.
Perfect. Hi, Daniel.